Okay. So Christy, since you're the moderator in there, so could you please just sum up what's happening in their panel?
Yeah, it was a fantastic discussion just then about investigative reporting in China, going into the nuts and bolts. How do you dig up a big story in China? And we have seen tremendous stories come out of China in the last year, in particular the alleged wealth and the money trail of Chinese leaders past and present. So we talked to Neil Western, the investigative editor of Bloomberg, Natasha Khan of Bloomberg, also Edward Wong of the New York Times. So we got into the nuts and bolts of just how do you cultivate your sources? How do you dig into a story? How do you use social media? How are you able to discern fact from fiction to put a story together? And how do you rely on your team, the project management? Because a lot of these endeavors are month-long endeavors to dig into the story. You may be fronting as a reporter, but you also have, the army of news assistants and Chinese news assistants behind you. We also got into the risks involved and the working conditions, because when you're dealing with sensitive stories, some of them that could be deemed as state secrets, there could be repercussions. And we talked about the repercussions that all the journalists and those news teams faced, not just for foreign correspondents, but also for Chinese nationals and Chinese news assistants as well. And lastly, we rounded out the discussion talking about, well, what's next? If last year, corruption, political corruption, if that was the big story, what's going to be the big story of 2013 and looking ahead? And one interesting theme that came out of the discussion was, after so much focus on Beijing, the seat of power in China, especially after the recent leadership transition, there needs to be more focus about what's happening in the provinces, what's happening in the countryside, in the second and third tier cities, where a lot of the future leaders of China will come from. And that's what the panelists said, the focus of their journalistic attention. They would like to see more attention there in the months and years ahead.
So we know that you're hosting this program called On China at CNN. So what are the difficulties when you're reporting China?
I think the biggest difficulty reporting on China, for the show on China, is actually a language issue. CNN, we broadcast in English language, 200 countries and territories around the world, 200 million households. And we want to showcase what is really happening in China with newsmakers and leaders from respective industries inside China to the rest of the world in English. English is a second language to many people inside China. We don't want to bring in talking heads who are Western observers of China. We want to bring in people who really know what's happening on the ground. So a big challenge for us is being able to find the people who have the stories, to find the environmentalist, to find the diplomat, to find the economist who are Chinese nationals and who can speak passionately and eloquently, in English no less, to an international audience about what's really happening in their country. That is a big challenge for us, and I think we're doing a pretty good job with On China finding those right voices.
Okay, so have you ever cooperated with any Chinese national journalists or just locals there?
Well, I know at CNN we have an affiliate relationship with CCTV. I've worked with CCTV anchors and reporters with workshops, and these are learning opportunities where we can learn from each other about our craft. Recently, when I was in Beijing for On China, we had one of these old China hands dinners. We had two of them, where you sit down with local contacts, local sources, which also included Chinese news assistants from other news organizations, a Chinese anchor reporter from CCTV, etc., just to talk to them informally and find out, what stories are you working on? What are people talking about? It is so important as a journalist to network and to keep your nose on the ground to figure out what's really going on.
So personally, how important do you think social networking is?
Oh, social networking is incredibly important. And I'm on a variety of social media platforms. I love Twitter. I'm also on Facebook, on Google+, and Instagram, and Pinterest, etc. You can tell I'm a little bit of a social media junkie. And it's important to find out, number one, what stories are captivating audiences? What are people talking about? Number two, especially as I work on TV and CNN, an opportunity to interact with my fans and to talk to them directly and to engage with them. And lastly, news breaks on social media, especially as you have increasingly newsmakers going on social media. It was in the last couple of months, Bill Clinton, just came onto Twitter. You have high-profile individuals communicating directly to the world on social media. To be a modern-day journalist, you have to be there to cover the story.
So how about people networking? How important is it?
People networking is always very important. As I mentioned earlier about the China Old Hands Dinner, that's just one example of just meeting face-to-face with sources. You're not doing a formal interview, It's just to cultivate that source, to keep the channel of communication open, and just to hear what people are talking about, what's the buzz, and what could be a potential story. Networking for journalists is very critical, so you can keep your eyes open, your ears open, and perhaps find that next big story.
Okay, thank you so much, Christine.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, done. Thank you so much.
All
Thank
right.